Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yang Berhormat Tuan Nga Koming, Minister of Housing and Local Government of Malaysia. Yang Berhormat Puan Michelle Ng Mezi, Member of the Selangor State Legislative Assembly for Subang Jaya. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Sir Dr. Jeffrey Cheah, Founder, Chancellor, Sunway University, and Founder and Chairman of Sunway Group. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, our Sir Jeffrey Cheah Honorary Distinguished Professor at Sunway University and President of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, UNSDSN. Yang berbahagia Professor Datuk Sri Dr. Idris Jalla, Pro-Chancellor of Sunway University. Yang berbahagia Professor Dr. Elizabeth Lee, Group CEO of Sunway Education. Professor Sibrandes Popema, President of Sunway University. Distinguished guests, members of the diplomatic community, colleagues, members of the media, friends, and to everyone joining us this afternoon, thank you for being here. My name is Daniel Rahman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute, or ASLI, and it is my pleasure to convene today's dialogue. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, today's dialogue with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, titled ASEAN in the Midst of Shifting Global Order, is led by Sunway University, together with the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development and ASLI, all of which are owned and governed by the Jeffrey Cheah Foundation. Sunway University, established in 2011, is proud to be ranked the #1 non-government-linked private university in ASEAN and recently rose to 141 in the Times Higher Education Asia University Rankings 2025, its highest position yet. Most importantly, as a not-for-profit, research-intensive university, Sunway University is deeply committed to impactful research and sustainability-driven innovation, supported by world-class partners and its unique location in Sunway City, Kuala Lumpur, which is Malaysia's model smart, sustainable, and green township. And as Malaysia chairs ASEAN this year, and is what has brought all of us here together, and the ASEAN Summit coming up next week, or coming up very soon, and of course, may traffic be kind to all of us. We believe it is vital to hear from global thought leaders like Professor Sachs, whose voice has shaped international development discourse for decades. It's a true privilege and honor to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, and now, oh yes, you can give him a round of applause, of course. Very kind of all of you. And now, to get things going, it is my great honor to invite today's host, a visionary leader whose commitment to sustainable development and education has garnered global recognition. He's the founder and chancellor of Sunway University and founder chairman Sunway Group. With that, I invite Tan Sri Datuk Sri Sir Dr. Jeffrey Cheah to deliver his welcoming remarks. Tan Sri, the floor is yours.
Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry that I have to use this room because I know with Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Jeffrey Sachs here, the response will be overwhelming. But unfortunately, our ballroom is booked. Our convention center is also booked by others. I can't do much, but we have to do it here. So I think you bear with us. A very good afternoon and welcome to Sunway City, Kuala Lumpur. Now, it gives me great pleasure to play host to the special dialogue with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, titled ASEAN Amidst the Shifting Global Order. Professor Sachs is chairman of the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University, as well as the Jeffrey Cheah Honorary Professor at Sunway University. He is, of course, a tireless campaigner for the sustainability agenda. In his role as President of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or UNSDSN. He has served as a special advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General, including the incumbent Antonio Guterres. And Professor Sachs is here in Malaysia to participate in the ASEAN Summit next week. And we are pleased to have this opportunity to host him today to tap into his insight on global events and issues. I regard it a great honor, Jeff, and privilege to consider him and his family long-standing friends. Sonia is not, the wife Sonia is not with us this time, but his daughter, Professor Lisa Sachs, is here. Where is Lisa? Hi, Lisa. Hi. And Professor Lisa Sachs is a distinguished expert in her own right and currently director of the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment. My friend Jeffrey, welcome home. Each time you return, you enrich all of us with your great wisdom, insights, and perspective. And we are grateful for the time you share with us. I would also like to welcome our Honorable Minister of Housing and Local Government, Yang Berhormat Nga Ko Ming, to this dialogue. And of course, we also have our Subang Jaya Atun, Yang Berhormat Michelle Ng here with us today. We welcome also Your Excellencies, Ambassadors of Japan, High Commissioner of Australia, as well as representatives from the Embassy of Russia, Brazil, Azerbaijan. Is that the name?
Great.
As well as the High Commission of the UK, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Nigeria. Many esteemed corporate leaders and bankers are also here. Welcome. In fact, we have such an overwhelming response that we could not accommodate all, like I said, who have signed up and had to open a few satellite rooms next door for this dialogue. And we could not hold this event in the Grand Ballroom, like I said, and the Convention Center with larger capacity, as they have been fully booked. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in turbulent times, to say the least. In addition to climate change and wars in Europe and the Middle East, we are now in an era where geopolitical tensions are perhaps at their highest level since the end of the Cold War. And the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement were supposed to put us back on the right track. But recent reports on both fronts indicate we are way off the track now. In other words, we are failing our children and our future generations. Yes, it is very serious. Many people are very worried, and I am told by some of our professors that many climate scientists are suffering from despair and depression. Jeff, in dedicating your career to the advancement of sustainable development and world peace, to justice and fairness, to wiping out the curse of poverty and hunger, you have made some powerful enemies. Even as you fearlessly continue to pursue these noble causes, I trust you are taking every precaution to ensure the safety and well-being of yourself and your family. This predicament is a reflection of the strange times that we live in. While we greatly appreciate your work, we care for your safety, Jeff. As you try. Ladies and gentlemen, the ASEAN Summit chaired by Malaysia begins next week. It is heartening to note that the agenda laid out by our Prime Minister, Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, is built around a vision of shared progress, guided by the theme of inclusivity and sustainability. The Asia headquarters of the UNSDSN, based here at Sunway University, and one of the only 3 such centers in the world, is fully committed to playing its part in advancing these objectives. And of course, the other two centers are in New York and Paris. And together with Professor Sachs, we will also be convening a high-level strategic session on ASEAN's integrated energy and digital future this Sunday, on the eve of the ASEAN Summit at Sunway University. Our UNSDSN Asia team here has put together a program comprising senior officials in the public and private sectors across ASEAN to unlock the immense potential of the ASEAN power grid and an integrated digital economy. I invite all of you to join us then. Ladies and gentlemen, our shared aspiration in ASEAN for a more inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable future is a source of hope and positivity in these times of turmoil and turbulence. And like all of you here today, I very much look forward to hearing the views and insights that Professor Sachs has to offer as we navigate through the challenges that are confronting us today. Without further ado, Jeff, I hand the mic to you. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll stand here if it's okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Tan Sri. Thank you so much. It is like being at home. It is home, in fact, and both Lisa and I are thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that I'm on stage and Lisa is in the audience, because usually when I go someplace now they say, oh, you're Lisa Sachs's father. So she has to look at me this time rather than the other way around. But she's a professor at Columbia University teaching climate finance, which is very relevant for our discussion and for the challenges of the next days at this very important ASEAN-China GCC summit. The summit itself is a sign of the times. It brings together the great expanse of Asia, China, ASEAN, and Western Asia. And this is the dynamic rim of the world economy today. And so this upcoming summit is a very promising opportunity and a great tribute to Malaysia also as president of ASEAN. I'm sure that it's going to be a spectacular success in the coming week, and also the Malaysian presidency of ASEAN is going to be a spectacular success. There's a lot to do, and I'm convinced that ASEAN is going to do it. My main theme actually is that with all of the turmoil and no doubt serious risks, there are true reasons, not only rhetorical, but true reasons to be optimistic. The world is disrupted and changing rapidly, and it is changing in frightening ways on the surface. But I want to argue that below the surface, the deeper trends are positive, and not only positive, powerful as well. So the notion of sustainable development, which Sunway University champions, and you see it in the signs everywhere of the Sustainable Development Goals, that is the right track. And while there is a lot of work to do, it is the path that I believe the world is going to achieve. It needs to achieve it, it can achieve it, and that combination of both need and capacity, to my mind, suggests that we are going to find our way forward. the theme today is the disruption, the shifting global order. And of course, we do feel every day how fast the times are changing and therefore how unpredictable events seem day to day. And there are fundamental reasons for this dramatic feeling, this great uncertainty day to day. Of course, the world economy is changing dramatically. I wouldn't say before our eyes every day, but year to year and decade to decade, there is profound transformation underway. At the core is something quite important, and that is that Asia has ended a long period of domination by Europe and by the United States of the world economy. And Asia has restored its place as the center of gravity of the world economy, the place that Asia has had for most of the last 2,000 years, actually, with the interruption of the period of the Industrial Revolution, which came first to Europe. It was the engine, if I could put it that way, of European imperialism and roughly 250 years of European dominance. And that period is ending. And in fact, it is that rapid catching up of Asia and the geopolitical changes that are caused by that rapid catching up that give the sense of the profound disruption and uncertainty of our time. But because the underlying reason for this change is the rapid development of this part of the world, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Western Asia, the countries that we'll be meeting in the coming week, even though this change is very disruptive, it is not a cause of panic, but rather, when one steps back, a cause for optimism. Because what has happened is that a world that was profoundly divided by power and technology is now truly a multipolar world in which the United States and Europe, no doubt, remain very sophisticated societies, very powerful societies, but no longer dominant societies of the world. We've entered the age truly of multipolarity. That's a big challenge, but it's also a wonderful fact and great opportunity. A world dominated by Europe, and then after Europe by the United States in the second half of the 20th century, was not the kind of world that we wanted. A world in which one small part of the world had predominance in technology, in military power, in wealth, in finance over the rest of the world. We have wanted a world in which these benefits of technology are widely shared, and we have it now. So this is the first point that I would make. The fundamental economic fact of our time is what economists call conditional convergence, and that is the ability of countries, for whatever historical reason, that are technologically and economically behind others, whether it's in income or in the rollout of infrastructure and technology, have the chance to catch up or to leapfrog those that were in the lead. Because when they build the new infrastructure, believe me, that's leapfrogging. If you want a reminder of that, fly into an airport in the United States, and you'll remember that this region of the world is truly leapfrogging and developing an infrastructure that is more modern, more 21st century than you'll find in some of the so-called advanced economies of the world. Now, this economic change is undoubtedly creating geopolitical tensions that are very dangerous in the short term. And I will come back to those in a moment. But I want to say that we have other drivers of fundamental change as well as the economic convergence. And I should mention that I use the phrase conditional convergence, which means that catching up or leapfrogging is not automatic in any sense. It's only a potentiality of an economy or of a region. It's possible to mess up in this world. If governance is bad, if economic strategies are bad, if the public sector does not perform alongside the private sector, then that potentiality is not achieved. But the chance to grow faster, the ability to grow very rapidly is the fact of our time right now. And the reality of our time is that almost all of Asia is taking advantage of that and has been in recent decades. We have, of course, had 40 years of remarkable growth of the People's Republic of China. We have rapid growth throughout most, though not all, of ASEAN. We now have India growing at 6 to 7% per year, the fastest growth rate, in fact, of a major economy in the world. That's a major change as well underway. And we see that kind of rapid economic development in other parts of Asia. I'll indicate in just a few minutes that I think the same will happen in Africa, which is by far the most laggard region of the world economy for many reasons of history and physical geography. But this will be an age in the next 40 years of rapid economic development in Africa as well. Now, in addition to the economic change and the geopolitical change, are three other major disruptive forces, all interconnected. But both the driver of the economic change and the greatest propellant of disruption today is the extraordinary rate of technological change as well. This isn't an automatic fact, but it just happens, and it was by no means guaranteed, that the digital revolution is proving far more revolutionary and productive than was widely expected even 10 or 20 years ago. We all know it and feel it every hour of our day. The artificial intelligence advances, the large language models, these seemingly just sprang upon us in the last few years. And for most of us, that was the fact. Of course, the scientists, the computer scientists, the mathematicians, the electrical engineers, the others in this field have been developing the underlying reality of this revolution at least for 75 years. One could probably date the digital revolution to Alan Turing's imagination in 1936 and John von Neumann's brilliance in the early 1940s, but it required cascades of advances of the transistor, of the integrated circuit, of semiconductors and microprocessors, of connectivity, of the World Wide Web being invented, of artificial intelligence and neural networks, which was first conceived in the 1950s, declared a dead end around 1970, and the miracle of our time today. So much has happened over now 90 years that has brought us to a pace of advance that is unparalleled. And what's fascinating about this digital revolution is that it's revolutionizing every field of science. So it's not only computation and artificial intelligence, but what that means for biological sciences, for material sciences, for every other dimension of science and technology. It's being profoundly impacted by these technologies. The reason that this is so disruptive, of course, is that any profound technological change changes the way we work, we live, how our cities are laid out, the paths of urbanization, the time allocation of our lives, whether we're staring at screens most of the time, whether we're physically at work, whether we're commuting. All of this has changed through waves of technological advance, and they will change probably more radically than ever before in the coming 25 years, and in ways that are still, to a large extent, unknown and perhaps even unknowable at this stage. Now, in addition to all of this, the economic, the geopolitical, and the technological change, of course, is the ecological disaster that is rising at the same time. Again, not accidentally or incidentally, but the economic success has had side effects. And the main side effects that are dramatic and adverse, of course, are the ecological side effects. The modern world economy grew up on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels just by accident, not because they're fossil fuels per se, but by accident, have the property that when they are burned, they change the climate. This is an accident. It means not that fossil fuels are immoral or something wrong with them other than a quantum mechanical property of carbon dioxide, which is the bad luck that it happens to absorb infrared radiation. And the fact that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because of the fact of the 3 atoms of CO2 configured in the way they are, means that the rising concentrations of carbon dioxide are warming the planet. This is bad luck. It's bad luck in the sense that it didn't have to be this way. There are many compounds that are not in their quantum mechanical properties greenhouse gases, but carbon dioxide happens to be one of them. And this was realized, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, 129 years ago, definitively. So it's not news exactly. The chemist Svante Arrhenius, the Nobel Swedish laureate in 1896, with pencil and paper, literally, no computer model, of course, because there were no computers, no climate models, because there was no such thing as climate modeling, but with the brilliance of understanding the implication of the spectrum of absorption of CO2 that had been demonstrated in the laboratory in the 1880s and 1890s, understood that more CO2 would warm the planet. And with paper and pencil, apparently over an 18-month period, Arrhenius reached the conclusion that if CO2 doubles in the atmosphere, that would lead to around 5 degrees C warming. And that so-called climate sensitivity turns out 129 years later to be right on the mark. Actually, right on the mark in an absolutely alarming way, because up until a few years ago, it was said that Arrhenius was wrong, that he overestimated the climate sensitivity because of various feedbacks. And the IPCC, that intergovernmental panel that gives us the consensus on science, said that the climate sensitivity is, quote, only 3 degrees C for a doubling of CO2. I have a very annoying colleague at Columbia University who happens to be a genius and a very brave man and America's leading climatologist named James Hansen. I've mentioned him each time I speak here because he always gives me bad news. And so I like to share the bad news just to get it off my back. But he wrote a paper earlier this year that said, no, all of the evidence put together now of Earth observation, of the energy imbalance, which now can be directly measured by satellites, and the paleoclimate record of how temperatures changed in the ancient climate suggests that the sensitivity is 4.8 degrees C for a doubling of CO2. And Hansen is very annoying, by the way, because for 40 years he's been right on just about everything. And he just scared the wits out of me for 25 years as my quiet colleague, because he'd come up to me and say, Jeff, it's much worse than we think. And this is actually the findings. You'll all know that we breached the 1.5 degrees C level, which we said 10 years ago at the Paris Climate Conference we would not allow to happen. And just 10 years later, way ahead of the predicted course, we reached 1.5 degrees warming compared to the pre-industrial temperature, which is usually taken to be the average 1850 to 1900 or 1880 to 1920 as the base. We're now 1.5 degrees higher than that. When that happened 3 years ago, it was said, well, that's just temporary, that's an El Nino effect. But now we've gone through an El Nino to a La Nina to neutral, and the temperature is hanging at 1.5 degrees C. And Hansen argues, and many other climate scientists now argue, that's because the underlying sensitivity is higher than we thought, and some of the warming had been hidden from view because of pollution from ocean shipping, specifically sulfate aerosols that was dimming the sunlight, but as the ocean shipping got cleaned up, that exposed the underlying faster rate of warming. Well, suffice it to say, ladies and gentlemen, this climatological change is part of a more general ecological disaster that is unfolding that we still have not come to grips with. Because it's not only the climate change and all the effects from climate change, it's also the massive disruptions to ecosystems. Think about all of the deforestation of Malaysia throughout Southeast Asia. It's taking place in the Congo Basin. It's taking place in the Amazon. Many of the rainforest regions are reaching tipping points because rainforests provide their own rainfall. By the way, they transport rainfall along the margins of rainforests through the hydrologic cycle that they induce. And it's possible to reach tipping points where you chop down enough rainforest and you convert to dryland. And this is happening in the southern Amazon, for example, which is close to a tipping point at this stage. Well, it's not only the rainforests that are a threat, it is our wetland areas, our alpine areas, the boreal regions of the world, the fisheries of the world, the coastal regions of the world. They're all under assault. So we have a major loss of species, a growing list of species at risk of extinction, a growing list of ecosystems at risk of reaching tipping points where they flip into some kind of ecological failure. Then add a third dimension of the ecological catastrophe, and that is the chemical pollutants, which are now pervasive in our bodies, the microplastics in our brains. We are living in a sea of chemical pollutants because we have a modern chemistry, petrochemical industry, and it creates not only plastics and other things that we use, but it creates pervasive pollution of the air, the fresh water, the soils, the oceans. Now, it doesn't sound like I'm on an optimistic note, but let me just hasten to add quickly, there are solutions to these challenges. There are ways to do things that we now understand, that scientists and technologists have invented that give us the way out. The problem is applying them at the speed, the scope, the scale to actually solve these problems. The fundamental problems are therefore political. They are not technological, because the options exist to solve these problems, but we are not solving them at scale. The last disruptor that I want to mention is the demographic change, because we're in a period of rapid demographic change. It comes in many varieties depending on which part of the world. In parts of Asia, the rapid demographic change is the end of population growth and the rapid aging of the population. And actually not only reaching peak population, but now entering a period of rapid decline of population. China is Exhibit A. China has reached its peak population, and if you take a reasonable extrapolation of China's demography, China's population will fall below 1 billion people by the end of the century, but arguably and quite possibly below 800 million. So there will be a dramatic decline because the fertility rates are so low. At the same time, the aging of the population will be significant, with the median age near 60 years old. This is quite a change of society ahead. Other parts of the world are still in a rapid population growth, and Africa is the continent that still has very high fertility rates and will therefore expand from the current 1.4 billion people to perhaps 2.5 billion by mid-century, rising from about 18% of the world population to more than 25% of the world population. And if you extrapolate somewhat mechanically, because it's risky to make too many extrapolations too far, Africa's population reaches nearly 4 billion people by 2100 in a world of about 10 billion overall, so almost 40% of the world population. From around 10% at mid-20th century, from 1950 to 2100. So we have massive change of population as well, and that means massive change of migration. That means massive changes of the location of economic activity, and so forth. Well, you put all of this together, clearly we are at a period of extraordinarily disruptive change, and we feel the earth shaking, and we feel that no one is quite in control. But there's one more element that I think is important and notable. I don't know how to put this politely, but the United States is having a nervous breakdown. So this is another element of what is happening. The US was for decades the most powerful country in the world, the dominant economy, and the technological leader. 2 world wars brought that about rather spectacularly, because 2 world wars ended Europe's dominance, because these were wars that were essentially European civil wars in that part of the world, as destructive at industrial scale, as cruel, as horrific as ever could be imagined. And that happened twice between 1914 and 1945. So by the end of that period, Europe was physically destroyed, Europe was morally depleted, and Europe was financially bankrupt as well. And that was also the end of the imperial era for this region, because Europe was exhausted. Some countries tried to fight it for a while, but reality caught up with everybody. And European imperialism, other than a few islands, and another one changed hands yesterday with Britain ceding another island, basically this period of European dominance came to an end. And the United States became the sole major power, because the United States in 2 world wars had only 1 day of those wars fought on American soil. And that was, of course, December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacked the naval base in Pearl Harbor. Other than that, the US just built its industry, built its technologies, advanced its technologies, and World War II was a period of astounding technological advance linked to the wartime effort. The discovery of inventions of radar, of semiconductors, of all sorts of avionic and aeronautic advances, of rocketry and cybernetics and computers and so many other advances that came out of World War II. And Hitler's insanity drove a whole generation of the world's leading scientists to the United States shores, those that survived. And so the US had not only the unique physical infrastructure and the unique scale of industry, but it had the scientific leadership of the world, with the partial exception of great scientists in the Soviet Union. But with that one exception, the US dominated. And the US believed that that meant the dominance basically forever, because when countries come to power in this way, they believe their own virtue. They read their own headlines, they read their own press releases. And the press release of the United States was the American Century. This was labeled in 1941 by Henry Luce. We're not quite there for a century, but they didn't quite make it for 100 years. But the United States thought that it would last as the dominant power of the world indefinitely, let's say. And for decades, the US did lead technologically, but smart people, ideas, education, science, and technology travels, it diffuses, and other parts of the world develop their own home turf for these advances as well. And I won't belabor this story except to say that the rise of first Japan from the devastation of World War II, and then the so-called Asian tigers, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, sorry, I'm missing one. And Korea, excuse me, South Korea, Republic of Korea. Those 4 following the Japanese model, by the way, in a lot of ways, in some cases almost literally institutionally, achieved rapid growth. And then China observed finally by the end of the Cultural Revolution that it could do the same thing. And by today, one has to say that East Asia absolutely rivals the United States in technological leadership. China in particular, across a very wide swath of technologies, is at par or ahead of the United States. And in terms of production, not only design and conception, no doubt Asia is far ahead of the United States in actually producing the advanced technologies of the 21st century. So the United States didn't count on that. But what has happened is even more interesting, I would say, geopolitically. And that is the US had a very good run, no doubt, and it was dominant financially, economically, and technologically throughout the Cold War period, with a real rivalry from the Soviet Union in the military sphere and in space technology, at least briefly. But when the Soviet Union dissolved into its 15 constituent republics at the end of 1991, in the American mind, that confirmed it's not only the American centuries, maybe it's the American millennium. The idea was that there could be no rival anywhere for decades to come, and now America absolutely ran the show. Who could even come close to the United States with the Soviet Union gone and the U.S. considering most other parts of the world wholly owned subsidiaries of the U.S. Politics and U.S. soft empire, if I could put it that way. Well, they're not very good economists in Washington, I have to tell you. They don't know how to look ahead. They don't understand the deeper trends. They never understood China, and they still don't understand China from then until today. There was no forward perception. China was a useful, rice-growing ally against the Soviet Union. That was China in the American imagination. Or a nice place to produce toys for American children, as Donald Trump said a few days ago, that the trade war would mean that American kids would have a few less dolls than they might otherwise have. That was the perception. I know it. I know these people. Some of them are my students, and some have been my colleagues. A few have been my teachers. They never understood. The favorite article of the time was The Myth of the East Asian Miracle. When you are powerful, you want to believe that anyone else's success is a myth. And that was really the dominant meme in the United States in the 1990s and 2000s. I can tell you one quick story. I published a very good book that no one has ever heard of called Rising Asia for the Asian Development Bank, the worst timed publication I ever made because it came out in 1997. And it came out saying that Asia had a very bright future because economic convergence is very powerful. We made extrapolations to 2025 that were pretty much on track, by the way. And it came out a month before the Asian financial crisis. And so I think the Asian Development Bank felt that this was the worst thing they ever published. I think all copies were probably destroyed. But in any event, the mood was that Asia could never really catch up. This was a bubble, an exaggeration, and so forth. But that book quite accurately said, look at the long-term deep trends, not at the short-term cyclical phenomena. And it didn't consider or study a short-term business cycle. It looked at a 25-year horizon, and it got the point right, which is that Asia would continue to have rapid growth. And I would say Asia outpaced what I predicted back in 1997, though it was a very optimistic and accurate assessment. But what Asia, and especially China, did was close the innovation gap as well as the technology gap. So this is probably the most dramatic fact of all, which is that it's not only the cutting edge technologies that are being produced in East Asia, but the innovation now is surging in East Asia as well. But the point I wanted to make was actually a psychological point, not a technological or economic point. The United States is deeply confused about all of this. Where is the American century? It's supposed to last at least to 2041, if not 2141. And suddenly, it's not there. So we are in a highly neurotic state right now, very agitated. And it's hard to find someone to sit down and say, calm down, it's okay. No one's taking away your good life. China's not invading you. China's not a threat. It is very successful, but you should enjoy that success, not bemoan that success. And so the added factor that we're facing right now is a reaction, a very deep and very unsettling reaction to this loss of leadership in the US. I have to say that most of the conflicts that we're experiencing now, whether it is in the Middle East or whether it is in Ukraine or the tensions in East Asia, have the US always as one of the causes of those conflicts. But most of the conflicts result actually in a deep way from the exaggerated US perception of its ability to dictate terms to others around the world. And this is what the United States did not understand, that it could not simply tell Russia, we do as we want in Ukraine or in other neighbors of Russia, because Russia does not want the US military bases on its borders any more than the United States would want Russian military bases in the Western Hemisphere. But the US could not understand the reciprocity of that, or the golden rule dimension, do not do to others what you would not have done to you. And so we did not understand that. And many of the other crises have this characteristic. What's dramatic is how ineffective, unfortunately, the United States is at facing this right now. This is why we have this tariff eruption, which is a complete sideshow, not a real event. It's a sideshow because raising tariffs has nothing to do with what the United States needs. It's not a solution for anything. And that's why they lasted 2 days. And the stock market collapsed and the bond market collapsed. And somebody came in to explain to the president, you better stop that. And it lasted vis-a-vis China for about 8 weeks because China said, we will match what you're doing. And then the United States backed down from that as well. So that's an example of what I would call a completely dysfunctional reaction to a reality, which is that the United States cannot dominate events. Donald Trump thought that the US market is so important, so dominant that no country could do anything but bend its knee and bend to the US will. And this is simply not correct. It's not a proper understanding. The US market for imports is only about 13% of world imports now. So you could close off the US market entirely and the rest of the world would figure out how to get along pretty well indeed. That was almost put to the test, but the US backed down quite quickly, and I don't think that it will come back. Just to say, and let me conclude here, some of the reactions are far worse. We are in what I call America's cultural revolution. That's not a good thing. Cultural revolutions do not go well. They set back China for 20 years, in effect, and the United States yesterday banished foreign students from Harvard University. That's not a joke. That's insane. It is self-destruction at a rate that is absolutely impossible to understand, other than in psychological terms. This is a backlash, a resentment, an aggression, an arrogance to destroy the core of your prosperity. And so one thing I know, Sunway University welcomes foreign students. And it's going to pay off big time. So let me just conclude with the following observations. Whichever direction one looks at the ecological crises or the still deprivation of very poor people in the world, and you ask the question systematically like an engineer, and I know this room is filled with leading engineers. I met several from Siemens, and Yi Chang is one of the great engineers of our age. If you look at this problem from an engineering point of view, what I love about engineers is they say, you give me the specs of what you want, I'll tell you how to build it. And you can do that with the problems that we face. We can remake the energy system to be a zero carbon energy system that works, that is efficient, that accommodates rapid economic development, that cleans the air, in fact, and has several other co-benefits alongside, and that is completely consistent with the kind of advanced digital economy that we are anticipating. And this is what I hope ASEAN adopts as an aim in the series of summits this year, because ASEAN should have a state-of-the-art 21st century green, clean energy system for the future. It can be done. If you look at any of the other sustainable development goals and ask the question in a very practical engineering way, could all children be in school? Of course, they could be in school. It's unbelievable that they're not, that actually hundreds of millions are not. That's a lack of organization and a financing strategy. That's not a technological determinant outcome by any means. Could everybody have access to health care? Well, with all of the advances of artificial intelligence, the ability to provide health care anywhere at quality has soared just in the last 2 or 3 years. And this is not simply a wish. This is actually happening in many places, because now you don't have to have the doctors nearby for most things. You can do remote imaging, you can do remote diagnostics, you can do a tremendous number of things that don't require the physical build out of infrastructure in remote areas that simply were not possible even 2 or 5, much less 10 years ago. And so we do not lack for practical solutions. What we lack is the organization and the integration of the know-how in our universities, in our research laboratories, in our think tanks, with the governments, so that this job can get done in an effective manner. China, by the way, to my view, is the most successful country in the world in integrating a high level of analytics and long-term government planning. And that's why China just put in its 50,000th kilometer of fast rail, for example. They built out infrastructure in a way that no other part of the world has done. It's why they're adding 300 gigawatts of solar power every year to capacity right now, and that will probably go up to 500 gigawatts in the next year or two. The capability of massive transformation is at hand. We need the organization, the planning, and the know-how. What finally will make this work is strong regional integration. The problems cannot be solved at the national level anywhere. That's even true for giants. For India, they need hydropower coming from the Himalayas, from Nepal and Bhutan. China needs an interconnection of its grid with next door Mongolia and with Southeast Asia, in fact. The United States absolutely needs Canadian hydropower and Mexican solar power in order to be able to decarbonize the energy system. And for the 10 ASEAN countries, of course, not one reaches a scale that by itself could make this kind of transformation. So this is why the ASEAN Summit is so important, why Malaysia's presidency is so important, because regional groupings are no longer nice things to do, pleasant meetings to have with your neighbors. They are essential for success. We need governance at a regional scale. And of course, the scale that we need in East Asia is at least at the level of the economic partnership of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that brings together China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand. I envision that all 15 will be in an integrated energy system, even physical connectivity of Australia with Indonesia by submarine cable and onto the rest of ASEAN. By the way, Siemens, which is well represented here, had the idea for Europe of what used to be called Desertec, which is to bring together a whole European grid with North Africa and the Middle East. Europe lost the way. Siemens pointed the way, but the politicians didn't follow. But that's the kind of logic that we need for regional solutions. China will play a huge, important, and positive role for this region. And by the way, the United States is not lost forever. We just need to get through our cultural revolution. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for the stamina and the passion in that presentation. I think can be clearly felt by everybody. Next up, I'm sure everybody's very eager for the Q&A. Hence, to lead our moderated dialogue and the audience Q&A, I'd like to invite Professor Datuk Sri Dr. Idris Jala, Pro-Chancellor of Sunway University, and an esteemed national leader in transformation, policy, and strategy, and more recently, popular podcaster. Datuk Sri Idris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be seated here next to two Jeffreys. And I got a lot of questions that have been posted. Perhaps I give the privilege for Tan Sri, if you feel like, give the opportunity to ask a question.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff, much like you and those of us concerned about the fate of humanity, I am deeply worried. Having invested so much time, efforts, and resources into setting up institutions like the Jeffrey Sachs Center here and the Asia headquarters of the UNSCSN here at Sunway University, it looks like all it takes is the White House to undo everything and turn the world upside down. How do you think we can overcome this real challenge to advance the sustainability agenda and the hopes of building a brighter future for our future generation? Jeff, please.
Thank you very much. I think the starting point, again, I'll say something negative, then I'll say something positive about the United States also. But a starting point is basic. The US is 4.1% of the world population. As I've said, it's about 14% of the world GDP. It's somewhere around 14% of the world CO2 emissions. It's important, but it's not decisive. If you measure GDP at so-called international prices or purchasing power prices, China's about 30% larger than the United States today. And, as I just said, the United States has a counterpart of 86% of the world. The United States is not only diminishing in its relative size and importance, but for the moment, it's abandoning international responsibility. The US has announced that it's leaving the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement. The United States is basically leaving many multilateral activities, also the World Health Organization and others, because the reaction to the loss of status is, I don't want to play with you if I'm not number one. I'll be number one some other way. Don't tell me what to do. And so the United States is in a psychological funk, as I explained. It doesn't want to play by the rules. It doesn't want to play by trade rules. It doesn't want to stop its emissions. It doesn't want to fund the UN, and many, many other things. But the rest of the world has not changed course as a result of this. You do not have the rest of the world standing up and saying about Donald Trump, finally, that's what we wanted in leadership. It's not happening. What's happening is everybody's scrambling. What do we do? How should we act? And so forth, but not how do we follow the United States on the way out of all of these multilateral objectives. That has not happened. What is happening at the UN level is a different kind of understanding, and that is we will not have unanimity on the global agenda right now, but they're using a phrase, substantial consensus, meaning that most of the world, in fact, a vast majority of the world, continues to be signed up to the agenda, while one or a few countries are not. And this, I think, is our reality right now, that first of all, the global agenda is not being upended. Now, having said that, it's also not being achieved. And it's not being achieved because most of our time is wasted in conflict and division right now. The leaders, even without the United States, are not getting together to talk about climate. They're every day talking about war. Every day, virtually, the Prime Minister of the UK, President of France, Chancellor of Germany, and Prime Minister of Poland meet with Mr. Zelensky. For what purpose, I have no idea. But they don't have day jobs anymore. They want to say every day we stand with Ukraine. Okay, this is a different kind of delusion, which is that we don't have to talk about peace, we should just talk about war. So while the US is absenting itself, Europe is in a different kind of frenzy, that it's lost its big protector, which it has. The United States will not defend Europe in the future. But the truth is, Russia's not going to invade Europe. And so there's a different kind of fantasy that's underway, which is that Russia's about to show up on the doorsteps of Paris as if we were in 1815, rather than in 2025. So this is also a waste of time for us. There's lots of waste of time. The Ukraine war is a profound waste of time. There is no reason for it other than that the United States wanted to expand NATO, and when Russia said no, the United States said, we don't care what you say, and it finally came to blows. That is the essence of this war. And the essence of the war in the Middle East is also absolutely straightforward. Israel says, we want everything. The rest of the world says, you get half. Israel says, we want everything. The United States says, we'll do what Israel says. 185 countries say, divide the property. It's actually not half. If you look at what Palestine was at the time that Britain took it over in 1921, Israel, under its 1967 borders, was already 78%. But that wasn't good enough for the radicals in Israel. They want 100%. And Palestine isn't supposed to have even 22%. So we're wasting our time on something that's absolutely obvious. 185 countries say 2 states, and the United States and Israel say, no, Israel dominates. And until that's resolved, the war will continue, this tragedy. And all it takes is one change a vote, not Israel's, because Israel has no veto, but the United States. It just drops the veto on a Palestinian state, and peace will actually come to the Middle East. It's quite amazing. These are problems that are a waste of time that can go on for decades. And of course, they're tragedies, they're disasters, but they're not complicated at the core. The only thing that makes them seemingly complicated is all the propaganda that surrounds them. But if you step back a little bit and understand the basics, they're not even complicated. And so the point is that the agenda is not disappearing. And the capacity to actually implement the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Climate Agreement or the Biodiversity Convention is much stronger today than 5 years ago, and incomparably stronger than 20 years ago. It just doesn't feel that way because no one's talking about it right now. All of the discussion is about the war in Ukraine or about Donald Trump's tariffs or about banning foreign students from Harvard University or something completely irrelevant to our world. We're wasting our time. My view is, though, most of the world is not part of that. That's the dominance of the news cycle, but not what most countries want, and not actually what most countries are doing. Again, I'll refer to China. China's an extremely serious government. It's got plans, it's got objectives, it's got 10 and 20-year perspectives, and it's building those. And it's not subject to these day-to-day news cycles in the same way. And I think with ASEAN, it can be the same and should be the same. And I believe that's true of most parts of the world. So I'm truly not pessimistic in this. I'm frustrated. I'm a little shocked at my own country, but I actually have watched it pretty closely for 50 years. A character in Hemingway's novel famously is asked in his novel, The Sun Also Rises, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer is, first slowly, then quickly. And one could say the same thing about America's political crisis. A long time slowly, and now very quickly. But it dominates the news cycle, but it doesn't dominate the real attention of the world, and shouldn't be allowed to. Our biggest danger is that these conflicts get out of hand. And here, let me say a word in favor of Mr. Trump. He actually does not like war. This is the best news imaginable. Boy, does he like money. He likes big airplanes. He likes all sorts of things. He likes golf, as we were discussing, but he doesn't like war. He is not a warmonger. And he is making peace with President Putin. And he's being attacked for it in the United States. But he's doing absolutely the right thing. And he's making peace with Iran, except that everyone in the United States is yelling at him, don't do that. But his instinct is, yeah, make a deal. There might be some money in it. And that is actually good. So it's not all negative, even in that way. This president does not like war. Joe Biden either liked war or just wasn't there part of the time, and someone else liked war. But we had 4 years of war, and Trump's actually trying to wind them down. Yeah. So all of this is to say, I know you asked me the question, are we losing the whole agenda? The answer is no. We're not losing the agenda. And the climate disasters are going to keep the agenda front and center no matter what. But we are distracted to no end right now. And our politics is so weird in the country that used to count a lot. What the world needs to do is learn not to focus on that little bit of the world and to keep the focus on the right things for the longer term.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Jeff.
The topic, Jeff, is about shifting global order. I just want to raise this point. 3 weeks ago, I was in Harvard. I lecture twice a year there for the Harvard Ministerial Leadership Program, one September and in April. When I was there for a week, the only thing that they were talking about was Donald Trump.
Exactly.
And you mentioned the cultural revolution that the US is going through. It just reminds me, if you look through history, this was what was happening with the UK during the time of the Second World War. Churchill was in a denial. He didn't believe that the British Empire was on a decline. He still wanted to make Britain great again. Very similar idea. But I think the war really brought them down to reality at that time. I mean, the war was ended. I mean, I heard one of your comments you said in one of the podcasts. 27 million Russians died to fight the war. And people had forgotten that.
Yeah, they won't acknowledge it.
People have forgotten the fact that 27 million Russians died to fight that war for the rest of the world. And of course, America came out there, played a very big part in the victory of the Allied forces. Now, the shift that we're talking about here, you talked about shift from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. But the US is not going to lose any significance at all. It will play a very big part, but not the way it used to be.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Exactly.
Now, the question for you is that, crystal balling it, how long do you think the US will come to their senses to accept that this multipolar world is real and there's no turning back to MAGA in the way that they were doing it, dominance after the Second World War? Because you said the Cultural Revolution is bad, and if it drags on for very long, it's going to hurt the US even more.
Yeah, China's Cultural Revolution lasted 15 years, from 1964 essentially to 1979, maybe to 1978. I don't think the United States will get out of this in less than 10 years, because what's happening in the U.S. is not Donald Trump. He's a symptom of what's happening. He's not the cause of what's happening. He is there in part because of the way that U.S. politics works. And maybe it's worth, I'll give you my quick 3-minute theory of U.S. politics. The U.S. made a very fine constitution in 1787. It was absolutely ingenious at the time. Brilliant people did it. It's a little out of date. You wouldn't do it this way now. But it was the first written constitution of its kind, and they get a lot of credit for it. The system turns out, however, to be vulnerable to several kinds of deep abuses. One problem bedeviled the United States from the start, and that is race. So the United States started as a extremely racist society, one of the most racist imaginable, with a large slave population. The U.S. was the only country in the world that needed a war to end slavery, a civil war. Other countries did it peacefully, but not the United States. The United States needed a brutal war to end slavery. It's unique in that way. And so the U.S. remains with a very significant racist element. And a lot of Donald Trump's policies are racist policies, actually. This is part of the problem. Yesterday, when he greeted the president of South Africa, he had a lot of nonsense. He actually showed pictures that had nothing to do with South Africa. They were from Congo. Now, but it's interesting, but I just want us to reflect on that for one moment. It means that the milieu inside the White House is so profoundly racist that what is talked about inside is simply vulgar. And that is the only reason you could have a president showing pictures. He must have shown them to a lot of people. They must have had a good time looking at this. But the racism is so strong, no one actually looked at the print underneath and said, well, Mr. President, that's not South Africa. And so that's the war in Eastern Congo. So this is one problem. That's a deep problem. That's the anti-migrant, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, many things. This is anti-China. The U.S. has had an anti-China racism from the 1880s, the Yellow Peril. This goes back a long time in American civilization. So that's one problem which is pretty deep. The U.S. has had waves where it gets over it, and then sometimes because of fear, neurosis, crisis, it falls back into it. So this is one of the factors that is there from the start, but it's in a bad wave right now. We had this in the 1850s, we had it in the 1880s, we had it in the 1920s, and we have it now big time. A very racist period in the US. By the way, why? Because the changing demography has put the white population in a more defensive mindset, a panicked mindset, because American society is actually more diverse than ever. And in a way, less racist than ever, except that there's a backlash among that part of the population that finds this frightening. So that's one part of what's going on. A second part of what's going on is that democracy is easily corrupted. You know it, we know it. Money corrupts. And the United States is a corrupted political system. The last political cycle, 2024, was a $16 billion cycle. That's not a lot for a $30 trillion economy. Our government goes for cheap. But 16 billion is also not nothing. You have to be a billionaire to play. And so this is a game of billionaires to buy the government. And that is what happened in the US, and the Supreme Court legalized this kind of behavior. It said that's free speech. Elon Musk is just free speech. When he says, I'll give $1 million to this one, I'll challenge anyone that fights Trump, I'll put a primary on them, and he can pay, you know? So this is an economic corruption is a second factor, not properly understood by our Supreme Court when it legalized all of this. Supreme Court struck down all the limits on campaign finance under the wrong idea that that is free speech. That's not free speech. That's legalized bribery. And that's a big problem. The third problem in the United States is that it is an imperium. And an imperium behaves by power, of course, but from 1947 onward, it made the key foreign policy process of the United States secret. So everything's confidential. And it's only because I've seen all of this with my own eyes for more than 40 years now. It's like the old cliche. How do you know when a politician is lying? when he moves his mouth. And how do I know when the US government is lying about foreign policy? When it says something. It's just nonstop lies. But it's secret. It's not really secret. Everyone knows they're lying. But you can't quite prove it because it's secret. It's deniable. So the United States played a major role in overthrowing the Ukrainian government in February 2014. I know it. I happened to be there a few days afterwards, and one of the people that played a big role bragged about it to me. To my face, explained, we gave money to this one, out on the Maidan. When I say that, I'm attacked as being a Putin apologist. But they told me to my face, standing on the Maidan. But it's deniable because it's secret. So this is a third point that has really weakened the American political structure. And so this is why it's not just Trump. It's deeper. We haven't solved a single problem in the United States at a major level for more than 40 years. We can't close the budget deficits. We can't vote on climate change. We can't get health care, universal coverage in the United States. The greatest trauma for 10 years was Obamacare. You know, and there was a huge fight, but Obamacare was 0.5% of GDP, and it consumed the nation for 10 years. Not the nation, it consumed the political class for 10 years. My point is we can't solve problems right now. So please have some sympathy, have some patience, but don't be obsessed about it. That's my point.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful.
Predictably, there is a lot of online questions. So many people have asked questions. I can see them on here. If you can keep your answers a little shorter, so that we can cover them. I'd like to ask whether the ambassador of Japan, Hechi Shikata Norikoki, would like to put his questions. Yeah, please. So, microphone, please.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Sachs. As a graduate of Harvard Kennedy School, I'm a bit, embarrassed, that there is a new policy, emerging around Harvard University, and I'm really impressed, by your talks. And one question which is lingering in my mind is. When we take a look at global international political landscape, there is a strong view that there is a rise of authoritarian, states. So democracies globally, may be undermined, and such rise of authoritarian states, may hamper also the promotion of SDGs. So my understanding is SDGs, have strong relations with democracy or human rights. Although maybe SDGs may not directly talk about freedom of speech, but the U.S. Constitution, U.S. system allows democratic change of the government. So I wonder, you also discussed this cross-border energy, power grid, and when the system of governments are so different, would it, make sense to depend on, for example, energy imports from authoritarian states, and then we may suffer from energy embargo, which may increase your vulnerability. So I'm very curious, how you kind of relate between those kind of political freedom, democracy, human rights, and this promotion of SDGs. And this is to a great extent related to how we could preserve and promote the free and open international order based on the rule of law.
Great. Thank you very much. How proud I am as a professor at the Kennedy School of Government to have the ambassador as an alumnus of the Kennedy School. And incidentally, I looked up today when the US government announced yesterday no foreign students at Harvard, which is a shockingly self-destructive action. Of course, not by Harvard, but by the government. 59% of the Kennedy School is foreign students. And that's one of the great prides of great universities. This is a terrible thing. I hope that a court will rule it illegal, which is quite possible, and that this doesn't go into effect, but this remains to be seen. I think there are many things, I can't answer that in 1 minute, unfortunately, so I am going to take a couple of minutes because I think it's important. There are no pure types of government, and there are no single, simple, ideal types of government. And therefore, the idea that we are good and they are bad is a very dangerous starting point. It's, I thought, the biggest mistake of the Biden administration. He said, the world is in a battle of democracies versus autocracies. First of all, if you start with the idea that the world is in a battle, you make a self-fulfilling prophecy. You divide the world. Second, if you do it that way, you end up missing all of your own failures and obsessing about the limits of the counterpart. In the Bible, I call it, my recommendation, I say, is my recommendation is Jesus Christ's foreign policy. The reason is that in the Gospels, there is a famous moment when Jesus says to the counterpart, why do you point to the mote in the other person's eye when you have a beam in your own eye? And the meaning of the passage in the Bible is, why are you complaining about the other? Clean up your own act. And so I think that this is actually truly from a behavioral and diplomatic and respect point of view, how we should behave in the world anyway. We should say, we have our failings. And by saying that, you help the others to say, oh, no, we have our failings. And you reduce the threats and you increase the mutual understanding. Everyone can say, my God, we're failing together. We all have our problems. But instead, the approach is, you're evil and we're good. And this goes over time in the propaganda of the government narrative and in the media. So Putin is pure evil in the American media. China is pure evil in the American media. This is, to my mind, both dangerous and absurd. Working with the Russian government, working with the Chinese government, this is completely contrary to reality. I've said if I had to choose which government has been most effective in the last 40 years, I would say China, actually. Why? Because China lifted a country from poverty to prosperity and with increased freedom of the population. Not political freedom, but increased freedom. And this is an incredible success story, one of the greatest in history. By the way, how did China do it? They followed Japan's model. This is what Japan did first in the Meiji Restoration, and then it did it again in the 1950s and with Ikeda, a decade of doubling of income. Japan taught the rest of East Asia how to make a rapid economic growth. And so this is not, by the way, not an enemy, nor is it something unfamiliar. What China's accomplished is very familiar. It looks like Korea's accomplishment. It looks like Japan's accomplishment. It looks like many other countries of the region. It just did it at a vast scale, which is all the more impressive that it did this. So I would characterize China as a highly successful governance structure that is meeting the needs of its population in a quite brilliant way. Now, China's government will continue to evolve, no question. They use the word democracy all the time, by the way, not as propaganda, but as their understanding of this process. And moreover, on one side, China won't evolve so much because China has been a centralized administrative state for 2,246 years, since 221 BC, when Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi first united the Qin Empire. I know that because Lisa wrote a paper about that when she was in 7th grade. So that's the first time I learned about that. But the truth is, China has been a centralized administrative state for more than 2,000 years. And so Xi Jinping looks like an emperor. It's not a surprise. That is the cultural tradition. That's culture. And that's real. But it can be successful or not successful. It can be cruel or it can be benevolent. One of the most interesting writings on politics in Western history was actually the first book on political science ever written 2,350 years ago by Aristotle. It's called The Politics. He invented political science. He invented almost every field of Western study, actually. But he invented political science in this book, and he said, there are multiple forms of government, but each form can be good or bad. You can have monarchy or you can have tyranny. That's government of the one. You can have aristocracy or oligarchy. That's government of the few. You can have republicanism or you can have mob rule. That's government of the many. So you can't just look at the form and say, is that good or is that bad? The tradition in China, and it's not an empty tradition, is that the emperor must convey Confucian ethics to rule, that you rule by the ethical leadership. What an interesting, nice tradition. Nothing like this in the Western thought. In the Western thought, you have Machiavelli. But in Confucian thought, you have the emperor who leads with virtues. So I don't classify governments the same way. And what I do believe is that we need to deal with each other with mutual respect and a lot of dialogue. I started my day actually with a Zoom meeting with members of the Diet, Japanese Diet today, and with academia in a meeting that took place, I think it was in the Diet building. I'm not absolutely sure because it was on Zoom. But what I said there, and I'll say again, Mr. Ambassador, is that Japan and China and Korea should increase the diplomacy and not be divided by the United States in this. And I pointed out something, if I may, with all respect. In 2,000 years, China never invaded Japan. Not once. 2 footnotes. In 1274 and 1281, the Mongols, when they were in control of China, tried to invade Japan. And the kamikaze wind both times defeated the Mongol fleet. But other than that, China never invaded Japan, never even tried to invade Japan. Japan, unfortunately, tried to invade China a few times. The first time, apparently, was 1592, when Hideyoshi, the regent of the time, went mad and decided to take over the world, starting with an invasion of Korea that was a prelude to invading China. He failed, as you know, and died in 1598. And then Japan invaded China several times, starting from 1894 up through World War II. And there's a very poignant book, actually, by a great colleague of mine and a teacher, Ezra Vogel, whom you must have known. Ezra Vogel was a great scholar of both China and Japan. He died a few years ago, but his last book was called China and Japan Facing History. And he said, I love both countries, but they don't get along that well. So I want to write the history of the relations of the two countries. And the relations are the following. As two Confucian civilizations, they were at peace for most of 2 millennia. Amazing. Think of Britain and France. They were at war for most of 2 millennia. Literally, every year for hundreds of years sometimes. But China and Japan, no. The monks would come, they would bring back calligraphy, they would do all sorts of things, but they weren't at war. Other than the examples that I just gave. And from 1368 until 1839, there was no war between China and Japan. That's from the beginning of the Ming Dynasty to the arrival of the British in the Pearl River in the First Opium War. No war other than Mr. Hideyoshi going mad in a brief escapade. Other than that, no war. It's sometimes called the Confucian Peace because there was a system, but it was basically a peaceful system of trade, some tribute which was symbolic, but completely peaceful. Then came the British, then came war, then came Japan's astoundingly successful economic development, starting with the Meiji Restoration, which started in 1868. And Japan did something completely brilliant, which was in 1871, it sent a mission of leading ministers around the world, because you couldn't Zoom then. And so they went around the world for 18 months, called the Iwakura mission, and they studied who does the best of everything. And they came back and they peacefully implemented all of that. Who made the best central bank? Who has the best constitution? Who has the best universities? Who has the best of each? The best army, and so on. And they took all the models and adopted them remarkably, with one little rebellion, the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877. Other than that, peace. It was the most successful transformation, and Japan industrialized. But here's my point. Upon industrializing, Japan attacked China in 1894. And 2 of the leading diplomats, Chinese and Japanese, met each other, and Ezra Vogel tells this story in the book. And the Chinese diplomat is crestfallen. Why did you attack us? We're Asian. We're being invaded by the Europeans. Why did you attack us? And the Japanese diplomat says, I'm sorry, but we've joined their club. That's literally the quotation. You know, Japan industrialized. And so it joined the imperial club for a while. Now, we're in 2025. It's time for Japan and China to say, we're together on this. We don't need American military bases. We don't need to be divided by outsiders. There's no reason There's no threat. China's not going to invade Japan, period. There's just no threat. And my view is, just a little secret for all of you, if you all get together, you absolutely will dominate the world economy. There won't even be a comparison. If you put together Japanese skill, Korean skill, Chinese skill, ASEAN skill, oh my God, no one could possibly compete. It would be a little nasty for the rest of us, but truly, why are you divided anymore?
Yeah.
So this to my mind is the real suggestion, and to put it to a test, diplomacy is the key, and diplomacy means talking, and I would like Japan's foreign minister to say to Wang Yi, look, you're big, you're 10 times larger than we are, how can we be safe? And I'd like to hear Wang Yi's answer to that, because that would be a very good question to ask. And I would like the Europeans to go to Mr. Putin and say, look, we feel endangered. How can you make us feel better that you're not going to invade some other country after Ukraine? And I'd like to hear the answer to that, because it's a valid question. I'm not worried about it, by the way, for 100 reasons, but it's a fair question to ask. What's not right is to stand at the sidelines saying, you're an enemy. We build up our military. We do this, without even trying the diplomatic approach. Diplomacy requires a table and 2 chairs. The military requires $1 trillion a year. Which do you think is the better deal?
Thank you. I'm just so tempted to put 2 points to the ambassador's question. The first fact is that China, in a very short period of time, they lifted 800 million people out from poverty. This is the biggest poverty eradication in mankind's history, actually. If you really look at the system of government, completely misunderstood by the West, most people in the Western world look at China's model of government as highly dictatorial. But when you really think about it, the method in which the government people get to the top is a corporate world, Jeff. So you look at Xi Jinping, he came right from the bottom. He had tremendous organizational skills. He didn't get parachute to the top. You know, he all the way up there in the corporate model. Just to think about it, if the world was to say, all the corporate world, we elect the CEO and the chairman every 5 years through popular votes. We don't get country automatically as the owner and founder, but if you lose the election, you lose it. I think if you put all the corporations using that model of electoral votes, I think you'll find most corporations go bankrupt. But the question that's asked of ourselves is, how come in the corporate world that system is solid and robust? How come in politics, in running a government, we don't use that? You've got to ask fundamental questions. So to me, the Chinese model is very much a corporate model. You think about it, Obama, when he became president, the single biggest organization he ran was the Senate. He had only 50 people. So he had only experience in running an organization, now 50 people. He never really had experience of large-scale organization to run it. But Xi Jinping, prior to him taking over, had tremendous organizational skills to get this going. I just my one-step point. I just want to move.
I want to add one more thing about foreign students at Harvard. In 1985, I had the best crop I ever had before or since. 3 students from Japan. One of them became Vice Minister of Finance and head of the Global Environment Facility, the first woman that was Vice Minister of Finance. Naoko Ishii-san, who is now professor at Tokyo University. The second became a great professor and minister of industry, Heizo Takanaka, and a great esteemed economist. And the third became the Empress of Japan. So that was fun.
Wow. Okay, next.
I don't take any credit for that. I just enjoy it.
Well, next question on my list here is Vivi Fazrana from a law firm partner. Is she here in the crowd? Yes, right there and there.
Yeah. Good.
All right, can you stand up, please, so we can look at your face? Thank you.
Sorry. My name is Vivi. I'm a law firm partner in Jalan Ampang. I know Azamenko. And I have been a huge fan of Professor Jeffrey. And when I saw your video with John Matchmeyer at All In Summit, that was a great one for me. My question is, based on what we have observed so far, ASEAN often finds itself navigating between the pool China and US. My question then is, strategic neutrality still a viable long-term posture, or is it time for ASEAN to assert a more defined position in this pool between US and China? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Look, I think, of course, ASEAN countries should seek good relations with all parts of the world. So the idea should not be an alliance. The idea should be that ASEAN, which is a very open region in terms of trade, should trade with the United States if the US still wants trade, with Europe, with China, and so forth. At the same time, two other considerations are important. The United States should not try to make ASEAN choose. That would be not only unfair, but if ASEAN were forced to choose, you would choose your neighbor, China, obviously, because ASEAN cannot do without good economic relations with China. That's not even imaginable. So the United States should not force or try to force ASEAN into making choices. And if the United States tries to put on secondary sanctions that impede ASEAN's economic relations with China, they would have to be resisted, actually, because neighbors need to trade, neighbors need to have common infrastructure, neighbors need to have transport, fiber, management of river sheds, and so forth. So the point that I would make is, of course, the goal should be openness to all. The goal should be good advice to all. Keep calm. Don't get into a conflict. We don't want to be in the middle of your conflict. There is no reason for a conflict at all, fundamentally, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And don't make us choose. And at the same time, ASEAN should work closely with China on physical infrastructure and connectivity. This is a neighborhood. The Belt and Road Initiative is a very important, positive initiative. It says put in fast rail, put in renewable energy, put in digital systems. That's to everybody's mutual benefit. So that is how I would approach this question. I do believe in general, again, it sounds a little naive, but I believe in general that foreign military bases should be eliminated, period. So over time, I do believe that the United States should leave. We can't afford it anyway. And President Trump said, well, Japan and Korea should pay for our services. And my view is Japan and Korea should say, thank you very much. We don't need to pay, but if you want to leave, that is also fine, because we'll do it with 2 chairs at the table. That, to my mind, would be the right approach to this.
I've got lots of very, very good questions, but I find one in particular most exciting, and this one is because it relates to advice that you might give to our Prime Minister. So this one, Daniel Raman.
Oh,
sorry. It's a bit of a moderator's, an MC's privilege, I guess. If I may, and it might be a bit of a controversial question, it's about taking contradictory positions. Malaysian Prime Minister has seemingly taken contradictory positions in recent times, condemning Russia's invasion in 2022, yet has visited St. Petersburg twice in the last year, has urged carving Myanmar out of ASEAN, yet recently met the junta leaders, condemns the Gaza genocide, yet still trades with arms-supplying countries, touts BRICS while affirming the UN and the WTO. Now, some columns have come out branding this as opportunism. Others say it is statesmanship rising beyond. How do you, Professor Sachs, decode these apparent contradictions? And what are your thoughts on what Prime Minister Anwar needs to do to make his ASEAN chair a successful one?
Well, he sounds like a politician to me. And by the way, an outstanding one. He's extraordinarily talented and a very fine leader of Malaysia and of ASEAN. So I'm very optimistic. Look, all of these require some subtlety, but I will tell you where I come down on those. The wars need to end. That's the practical step. When it comes to Ukraine, if you look at the history, as I have said, this war could have been avoided so many times had the United States had forbearance, had it not pushed NATO enlargement, had it not engaged in a coup in 2014, had it honored the Minsk II agreement that the UN Security Council adopted, had Biden negotiated with Putin, as I urged the White House to do in December 2021, and Ukraine and Russia were on the verge of actually making peace in April 2022 when the United States stopped the negotiations. So the practical point is actually to end the war. Donald Trump's trying to do that. I think all voices, including Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's voice, to end the war now through diplomacy. Diplomacy is the key point. When it comes to the Middle East, there is one straightforward thing that needs to be done, in my view. Of course, it's a morass. This war has gone on for more than 100 years, actually. My colleague Rashid Khalidi, a great colleague of mine who's a Palestinian professor at Columbia University, wrote a recent book called Israel's 100 Years War on Palestine. I think that's the title or close to it. Basically, he recounts the fact that what's going on now has been going on for more than 100 years. What is needed, practically speaking, is for the United States to stop its veto of a state of Palestine as the 194th UN member state. Within an hour, Palestine could become a state on the recognized borders of the 4th of June, 1967. And if that were to happen, all good things would follow. The Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have said repeatedly for more than 20 years, we normalize relations with Israel when there is the two-state solution implemented. And what Israel claims that there's no possibility of peace is a lie. They make the lie because they don't want two states. They want one Israel to dominate everything. So they make lies to try to justify that. That's the essence of what this is about. What were the other contradictions? Yeah. In general, I would not kick countries out of ASEAN. I would try to make neighbors work. You can't change your neighbors. This I tried to tell Ukraine also. They can do everything they want, but Russia's going to remain their neighbor. So you better get along with your neighbor. And by the way, if your neighbor's a little bit irascible, you feel a little bit dangerous, if I were you, I wouldn't go provoke the neighbor, tease the neighbor, yell at the neighbor, set his garbage can on fire, or do other things like that. I would try to be nice to the neighbor. That would be my approach. So in general, I would try to find solutions in the neighborhood rather than taking actions of kicking out countries. I would try to find solutions.
I'm picking another question because this is an advice. They're seeking advice from Jeff to politicians. We've got a few sitting politicians in the front row and also at the back row as well. So the question is from Datu Omar Siddiq of HSBC. He's the CEO, by the way.
Professor Sachs, it's an honor. Thank you very much. I'd like to reference some of your early work in Bolivia and Poland, for example, where you managed to advise governments to take very hard decisions to combat entrenched interests and to sort of make real market reforms, where it resulted in good outcomes in terms of economic growth and, of course, tackling inflation. Also in the world today, we live in a world of abundance, but in ASEAN and definitely in Malaysia, there's still significant social inequality in terms of access to education, access to healthcare. So to your mind, what would it take to incentivize big business, governments, to be able to allocate resources in a way that we guarantee a fair access to education, fair access to healthcare, and for them to make the right decisions when it comes to the environment? What can Malaysia do specifically?
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me say two things about early advice that I gave in Bolivia, which had a hyperinflation that was 24,000% between mid 1984 and 1985 when I was asked to help, and Poland, which faced the drama of the end of the communist period and a deep economic crisis. First, when there is a deep economic crisis, you probably need very decisive measures that need to be done properly. And so I recommended very decisive measures. Second, I was a young person now. I don't know if I'd have the guts to do it now because it was acts of youth in a way. But they worked, thank God. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. At least those two worked. But most of the time, you don't face a crisis like that. A hyperinflation is a very unusual phenomenon. These were particular moments of collapse of states, basically. And when states are in collapse, you have to do something to rescue the state. And that was the nature of the recommendations that I made. The problems that you indicated are very different in character. They are long-term societal issues. And let me just say a word about education, since we're at an education institution and an excellent one. As a factual matter, and again, not as a rhetorical flourish or a moral statement, as a factual matter, the highest economic return of investment in a society is education. This may sound surprising, but it's actually economically true. The finance minister should take special interest in investing in education. Of course, the problem is it's a little bit long term. You know, with all the technological advance, it still takes 20 years for a child to go from age 5 to age 25. The robots can do it in about 3 hours, by the way. So all of our robots that will come mainly from China, by the way, in the next 10 years, will get their PhDs in about 30 minutes. And if you want a different PhD, it'll be a different 30 minutes. So you'll have a walking, talking PhD in biochemistry, astronomy, physics, economics, finance, and all the rest. And also the robot will do the dishes. So this is a change that we're going to have, actually. But for us human beings, it's really wonderful to have an education. It's the greatest gift in life. It's the greatest gift that our parents give us, actually, in addition to the love that they give and our survival, it's the education. Because that's the most important empowerment possible, especially in a complicated world. Otherwise, you can't make sense of any of this. And today, you can't do it in any place in the world at a minimum of a secondary completion with quality secondary school, but that's basically not enough for the kind of societies that people want. And yet, in sub-Saharan Africa today, only 30% of the kids are finishing secondary school, and not at quality, by the way. So they're not even learning what they should learn, that 30%. So as a factual matter, I've made calculations that the societal rate of return to investing in education is 20% compound annual return, or even a little bit higher. You can't beat that. That's better than big tech. It's better than anything else you're going to invest in. So the finance minister and the education ministers for all different levels should really work together to make that model work. If you look at this region, who are the top performing countries in the world in education measured on the standardized tests of 15-year-olds, the program of international student achievement, PISA, of the OECD. All of them are East Asian countries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is something, not ASEAN countries, by the way, other than Singapore, which is right at the top. This is something, and Vietnam does extraordinarily well, ahead of its income level by a very long distance. China doesn't do the whole country, but Tianjin, Shanghai, and Beijing is absolutely at the top. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, Japan, all superb education. We should learn from this. Something really good happens in the education. It's also deeply cultural. The parents are driving the kids. You better perform. And this is also something quite amazing and something quite wonderful. So to my mind, without question, this is a public investment that should be the priority. Of course, once you achieve universal education, not only through upper secondary, but a substantial amount of university, then the science and technology investments follow that. And this is the brilliant step that Japan made first, going from a cutting edge of technology to a great innovator. And it's the step that China brilliantly mastered in the last 15 years. You look at rankings of research right now, China's ahead of the United States across so many fields right now in terms of published articles of significance. And so that required a lot of public investment as well. And so this is what government should be investing in. Healthcare, by the way, has both a core well-being dimension to it. We want to live. We want to be healthy. Technology allows that ever more successfully, actually. So this is one part. But second, health is an investment as well. Children who are not healthy don't learn. Poor health, poor nutrition leads to a whole lifetime of disability, actually, and deficiency. So these are very practical considerations. In the national income accounts, they're completely misplaced because they're called consumption spending, which is the most absurd thing of all. If they were called investment spending, we'd get it at least, that those are investments for the future. But the national income accounts put them as consumption spending when the accounts were written in the 1930s, and this has never been fixed since then. So this is the point. This should not be a hard sell. It doesn't require an emergency. It doesn't require some, monumental heroism to do. It should be the basic core idea that for Malaysia to achieve what it wants to achieve right now, the great breakthrough is to the frontiers of science and technology, and that is an investment process.
Yeah. Just looking at the questions, there's a related one from Dr. Mahinda Singh. He was a former advisor to the Ministry of Education. Is he in the crowd? Is he here? If he's not, I'm going to read the question. Yeah, okay. From your perspective, Jeff, what are the present and possible future indicators of quality education system, both at the basic and higher education levels?
Very excellent question. And there are two parts that I would give for the answer. One is the core skills, understanding our world, science, technology, education, mathematics, the STEM skills. So the first is getting the basic skills correct. And this is fundamental, and this is what PISA measures. And so watch the PISA scores. Countries, by the way, like PISA scores when they rank high, and when they rank low, they say testing is terrible. It's arbitrary. Well, my advice is take the testing seriously. It's good to benchmark where you are. It's good to understand where the performance is and what you can learn from this systematic, comprehensive measurement approach. And by the way, the person that runs the testing for the OECD, Andreas Schleicher, is an excellent educator, very serious, and he's done a superb job of making this testing meaningful. But the second part of education is under the SDGs. SDG 4 is quality education for all, and SDG target 4.7 is a wonderful target, which you can look up online, which is about the learning to live in our world. And it is about learning the culture of peace, learning respect for other civilizations, learning about sustainable development, understanding what's happening in our world, and respect for societies around the world, and the idea of living together on our planet in a culture of peace. And this is beautifully expressed as an aim. It was one of the favorite objectives of Ban Ki-moon when he was Secretary General. He called it global citizenship. It's learning the skills of being a global citizen. And this is extremely important as well, because this is our real world, and we see how hard this is. And when children are brought up to hate, and this happens absolutely in different places in the world, and they're told in their education system that some other country is the permanent enemy, or some other civilization is the permanent enemy, this is what creates so much of the harm in the world today. So we want our children to grow up to be good people as well. And that means a moral education, and that means an education of respect for others as fundamental for ethics.
Well, the next question is slightly left field, relating to the Pope. So this is from Dato' Anwar Taib, President of Sunway, Deputy President Sunway Group. Is he here? Hi. Anwar Taib. Give him the mic.
Apologies. It's an honor to be here. The question is, would the selection of an American Pope would provide some kind of counterbalance to the world that we live in? And if it's so, in what way?
Yes. This is a great question, and the answer is yes. Definitely, Americans are actually very thrilled with a Pope from the south side of Chicago. And they're paying a lot of attention. And that's a wonderful thing, because from everything we know about Pope Leo XIV, he's going to be a wonderful Pope. He's got a very unusual background, a Caribbean background, and of his parentage from New Orleans. He was born in Chicago. Most of his pastoral work was in Peru, and he's very well trained in a kind of Christian or Catholic social thought that I very much admire of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a professor at the University of Paris in 1260 to 1274, off and on. And he was a brilliant philosopher and theologian, and he took Aristotle's philosophy, which was, from a Christian point of view, a pagan philosophy because it was pre-Christian, and he combined it with the Christian theology, and he made a great synthesis. And sometimes it's called the synthesis of faith and reason. And Pope Leo XIV is trained in that tradition. He actually studied at St. Thomas Aquinas University. And he chose the name Leo XIV because the preceding Leo was Leo XIII, who was the Pope at the end of the 19th century. And Pope Leo XIII was a brilliant Pope who inaugurated a series of papal teachings or encyclicals starting in 1891, which are called the Church's modern social teachings. And in 1891, the first of these was in Latin called Rerum Novarum, which meant new things, and it was about the industrial age. The Pope said, we need the church to keep up with modern times. And that set a 130-year tradition of popes talking about current issues. And Pope Leo XIV took the name, I think, to be part of that tradition. His predecessor, Pope Francis, whom I knew well and loved, issued wonderful encyclicals in this tradition, one in 2015 called Laudato Si, about climate change. And quite amazingly, the church, the Catholic Church, brought together the climate scientists for several meetings to help inform the Pope to be at the cutting edge of knowledge about the actual climate science. So this wasn't just a theological reflection or a Sunday sermon. It was based on the best scientific knowledge. And then in 2019, Pope Francis issued another encyclical in this tradition called Fratelli Tutti, All Brothers, and it was about diplomacy. And it actually started with a story, a true story, of a saint of the Catholic Church, Saint Francis, from where Pope Francis took his name, Francis of Assisi, who in the year 1219 went from Italy to Egypt to meet with the Muslim Sultan, Sultan al-Kimil al-Malik, in 1219 at the Fifth Crusade on the battlefield. He tried to convert the Sultan. He didn't succeed, but they had a wonderful encounter where they discussed religion all night. And in gratitude, the Sultan didn't kill St. Francis. He let him peacefully out of the battlefield and back to the Christian side. And this encounter was recalled exactly 800 years later, by Pope Francis. And he dedicated the encyclical, this Catholic encyclical, he dedicated to the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University of Cairo, because he said, that's our world, Christian and Muslim together in peaceful encounter. So I mention all of this because this is the tradition that Pope Leo XIV will follow, and that's wonderfully promising.
I think that's about enough that we have for today, and I know that today is one of very, very interesting session. I consider this, you could hear a pin drop. It's almost like better than Netflix. And I would, all of us, I think we all agree that Professor Jeffrey Sachs is an enlightened Renaissance man. What we've heard today is a real masterclass on an observation of human history. He believes that we have to look at history from a broad sweep rather than short cycles. If you take a long, hard look at it and unwind it by looking at economics, looking at history, we become a lot more wise. We've heard lots of wisdom today, covering all sorts of topics. And so we've heard the best, probably the best I've seen in a podcast. What we promised to do, Sunway is going to put many of these and make them available online so that a lot more people will benefit from the wisdom that we have gotten today. And that's what we promised to do. Thank you so much. Once again, give Jeff Sachs the best of Malaysian applause.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sri. Just before we end, ladies and gentlemen, if I may kindly ask you to take your seats, because we just have one very quick closing remarks from our host, Dr. Sri Sir Jeffrey Cheah, as a vote of thanks and to kind of bring it all together at the end. Sri Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Idris and Professor Sachs. And of course, as you know, Idris is our co-chairman for Sunway Berhad. And Professor Sachs, of course, is Jeffrey Cheah, Honorary Jeffrey Cheah Professor at Sunway University. And I'm just amazed how you remember all the events and the dates. As I can't even remember the date of my birthday. Well, I trust you have found the insights by Professor Sachs valuable and impactful. This is exactly why we are proud of our association with Jeff through Sunway University here. The challenges that stand before us, as we know, are immense and formidable. And in this context, I am a firm believer in the proposition that the world works best when it works together. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, from a relatively young age, I adopted my conviction that every individual must have a higher purpose in life. And for me, that higher calling is a commitment to give back to society in a meaningful and impactful manner and nation building through quality education and knowledge sharing. My success as an entrepreneur allowed me to establish the Jeffrey Cheah Foundation to achieve my philanthropic goals. And to date, the foundation is the largest of its kind advancing education in Malaysia, awarding close to now more than 900 million ringgit in scholarship. And I'm confident that we will surpass 1 billion ringgit by next year.
Wow.
And in other words, the longer I live, the more I will give. As you all know, by end of this decade, Sunway will have more than 10 hospitals. We will have more than 1,000 doctors looking after me.
Wow.
So I should be able to reach what I hope to achieve.
Wow.
The foundation, of course, has gifted $20 million to the UN SDSN to help the organization carry out its mission in advancing the sustainability agenda globally. Our support for the UN SDSN lies in its name as the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the keyword being solutions. And today's presentation by Professor Sachs is another prime example of our mission to bring cutting-edge research and world-class expertise to Malaysia and the wider Asian region. In doing what we are doing, I hope the Sunway and the Jeffrey Cheah Foundation can inspire more organizations in the region to commit themselves to the sustainability agenda. This is much aligned to my personal motto, which is, I aspire to inspire before I expire. And Jeffrey, as I have mentioned earlier, we are very grateful for the time you share with us. Even as you travel around the world for the greater good of humanity, I'm really concerned that the safety and security of you and your family. And on behalf of everyone here, I sincerely wish you a long and healthy life for all the work you are doing for our world. Please take care of yourself, and God bless you. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri Sir, for your powerful, inspiring message. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers, we thank you for being here today. Perhaps I will invite shortly all guests for networking and refreshments. For members of the media, kindly come to the front of the hall. Now, if you may join me in rising and a round of applause to Datuk Sri Rijala, Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Tan Sri Sir for today's session.